Hello and welcome to this War Games Atlantic painting video. I'm Peachy and I'm going to take you through some super quick ways of painting your civilians and survivors. I'll be focusing on a couple of models using the same palette of colours across them. Regardless of colour choice, the principles are exactly the same. So I'll leave that to you to decide what colours you want to do. However, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, often I find with some schemes, picking the right undercoat is easy. However, when you have an eclectic mix of folks in a variety of garbs and colours, I often find a neutral colour works best. Grey is my go-to here as it's a nice middle ground between black and white undercoats. Now, the first colour I'm going to be using is going to be deep ocean blue, and I'm going to be base coating the trousers here. Now, I thin mine a little, just so it flows around the model a lot easier, but it also gives it a nice stonewashed effect as it dries, it'll pull away from the edges a little bit and you get some of that grey showing through, which looks kind of cool and perfect for that worn denim look. So again, just work your way around, making sure you're getting all those nooks and crannies. After that, I'm going to get some thunderous blue. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to dry brush this over. Now, normally when you're doing dry brushing, you're aiming for the raised edges, which is entirely what I'm going to do here. I'm keeping it to the folds of the cloth because with jeans or denim, it tends to get a bit frayed and a little bit lighter on those raised areas. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. Again, I'm not going too mad. It's more of a subtle dry brush in places, and it's mostly just for those folds of the cloth. Next up, I'm going to pick out this fella's jumper or top with some light battle dress. Kind of gives him a Norwegian fisherman vibe. Now, even though I've used grey as my undercoat, it still needs a second coat. Glad I didn't go with black though, because it would have taken a few more. So all you need to do is wait for the first coat to dry and then just apply a second coat. In some places you might need a third, but actually with that grey undercoat, I think two's more than enough. Now for any leather details, so the boots and belts here, I'm going to use some mud splatter. Now, possibly because it's more modern day footwear, these are trainers, but I kind of like the idea of matching the belt to the shoes or the footwear. So I'm going to pretend they're boots, like workwear or something like that. So I'm going to paint them mud splatter. It's up to you what colours you do. You can do them white, black, doesn't really matter. Then for the skin, I'm going to go with Paratrooper Tan. Now I'm doing a light skin tone here. I like using Paratrooper Tan. It's my go-to for light skin tones, and it usually covers quite nicely in one coat. But again, like depending on the areas, you might need a second here and there. For the hair, I'm going to use dark olive. This guy reminds me of the fella from My Name Is Earl. I don't know why, so I'm going to dig that vibe. I'm going to make him look like Earl. So he's getting dark hair, and I'm using dark olive because it's not too brown or too black or too grey. It's a nice mix between the three. So really like that. And also, if you want to minimise the amount of paints per figure, you could always use the same colour for the belts and boots too. Now, as you can see with this guy, I've done the jeans and top like the previous survivor. However, I'm going to use dark olive for his jacket as well as his boots. Now, for my guns, I like to mix some silver or gunmetal with black. Now, gunmetal as a colour is very silvery. However, gunmetal is subjective as it kind of depends on the gun in question. If it's a musket or a revolver, some are a little bit lighter than others. But for more modern day weapons, I want them to look a little bit more like black metallic. It just feels more appropriate. So what I'm going to do here is just mix some black in with my silver and it gives it a nice dark metallic look. Again, I'm going to do this all over the gun. Might just swap out for a smaller brush for some of those more niggly little areas, sort of like where the handle is and his hands are, or where the trigger is. And also for the other weapons, like the uses here, I'm also going to use the same mix. Again, just work my way around. You can thin it down a little bit. With that grey undercoat, that's going to help with coverage anyway. So even if it is slightly thinned down, it's not going to look too super transparent with that grey underneath. So you should be all right if you did want to add a little bit more water to the actual mix. Not a lot though, don't want to go mad. Now this fella here has an attaché case or something really important looking. That's actually from the Agent sprue. I just wanted to use that arm because it looked cool. I'm just going to paint this purely in gunmetal as well as the handcuffs and chain that connect it as well. Again, you could do it darker, you could do it military green, entirely up to you. I'm just going with silver. Now also this fellow with the case has dark olive for his trousers. I've also done cream for his shirt. However, I'm going to leave that jacket grey because I just want him to look a little bit more subdued, and we'll come to that later on after we've applied some washes. I'm also going to use some matte black for this fellow as well to pick out the shoes. Well, it's really nice with that grey and brown colours. Also, I'm going to give him that really kind of nice black slick hair, almost like a Sicilian vibe. I don't know, he's just got strong mafia vibes right now. Maybe it's just me. I don't know, I'm getting Sopranos feels from this dude. With all the base coats done, you can work around if they've got any bits that need tidying up, like maybe if you've got a little bit of cream on the belt, or if you've got a little bit of blue on the cream or something like that. Just go around, tidy those up, because what we're going to do now is move on to doing some washing or shading. Here I'm using Black Knight. That's a deep shade from AK. I really like applying models with shades all over. I find the deep shades kind of pool in the right places. They slowly move down the model as well, so you get a bit more of a blend. Depends how much you thinned it down. I kind of did thin these down on the model as well, so I apply some deep shade, then I apply a little bit of water. Now initially this guy here with the pistol, when I was applying the deep shade, there were some little bits here and there. Sometimes you just get random floaty bits, probably like a bit of dried shade from the lid or something like that. Just get a brush, soak off any excess. Again, adding a little bit of water when you're moving around as well helps remove that as well. Also, be mindful as the wash will pool in places, so just what I call wash watch, be mindful of that and soak off any excess if you need to. Now, once the shade is completely dried, it's time for some tidy ups. This is a nice simple way of getting a bit more definition out of that base colour, because once you've applied the shade, it darkens down the base colour, you can just relayer that over, and that gives you kind of an extra highlight as well as a tidy up stage. Now, in some places you can just purely do it as a highlight, in others you can just layer it in certain areas like where there's large flat areas, or you can do a mix of both as well, like I'm doing here on this jumper. So a little bit of layering and a little bit of highlighting. What I'm doing here is just adding a little bit extra punch to those leather sections. So I'm just going to go around, add some mud splatter to the boots and the shoes. And you can do that for other colours as well. If you've got like some browns or some whites on trainers and stuff like that, just go around, tidy those bits up. Same for the skin. Again, like the previous stages, I'm just going to go around picking out any raised details. So with the hands and face, I'll just do a little mix of relayering as well as edge highlighting. Again, picking out those extremities, knuckles, nose, cheeks, that kind of stuff. Also, it will depend on the models that you have. Some may have more flesh on them, so you might have some baldy guys, you might have some ones with like larger foreheads. Again, that will vary depending on the sculpt. And also, you know, I'm just doing paratrooper tan. You can do whatever skin colour you want. Now, I will cover some other skin tones in some future videos, so whether that's where I'm doing the agents or if I do like the operators, so you can have a nice mix. But again, you can always put some different speed paints over these to change the hue and the tone of them if you wish to. Now, one thing I like to do, especially if some colours need a little bit more help bridging the gap between materials or areas, is to use a little bit of black. Now, you can use speed paint grim black or whatever colour you want to, or like I'm doing here, it's just because I've already got black. I'm just going to thin it down slightly and just apply it. It's a really good way of just, especially with light tones, helps add a little bit of a border between certain areas. So between like the cream jumper and the flesh, it's a really nice way of adding a little bit more definition between those two details. Because sometimes the wash doesn't always add that punchy definition. Sometimes it will dry or be a bit wishy-washy, so I tend to just go around here and there with a little bit of black or dark brown. It's just a stage I like to do. Now, on this suspicious looking fella, I'm tying up the trousers with some dark olive, but that's all I'm going to do at this point. I'm not going to highlight it because I'm actually going to make the trousers look a bit dusty, so I'm not going to go too much effort highlighting these. You can do. You can get a lighter sort of brown colour, or you can mix a bit of cream into this brown, or dark olive as it's called. It's entirely up to you, but yeah, I'm just going to leave it tidied up. That's all I'm going to do. Now for the jacket, I'm going to get some deep grey, as it's a very close match to the Colour Forge standard grey. I'm just going to relayer those raised areas. In some places I'll layer, others I'll do a little highlight. Also a little bit of minimal blend in here as well. All I'm doing is just add a little bit of moisture where I've got some neat paint on, like where the shoulders are or around the back, and I just thin it down actually on the model. It's just a little technique I tend to do. Sometimes if I think that layer is a bit too thick or a bit too neat, I might just thin it down and help blend it to the surrounding area. A lot of painters do this. You can use water if you want to. I, and many other painters probably, it sounds a bit ick, will use saliva. You just dip the brush into the mouth and just thin it down that way. I know it sounds a bit gross, but it's what a lot of painters do. I'm not advocating doing it, but it works. It's one way of getting moisture in there. Now for any skin highlights, I'm going to use some amber skin here. Again, I'm just going to apply these to the more raised areas like knuckles, fingertips, cheeks, brows, the nose, that sort of stuff. If you want to push your minis a little bit more, you can always go around and define the jawline a bit more, maybe paint up some wrinkles, do the lips, do the eyelids. Again, it depends on the sculpt of the model as well, if they're easy to pick out, and also what level you want to paint. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You can just base coat and leave the wash to do all the hard work for you. Now the jacket here, I felt like it needed a little bit more definition just in some raised areas. So I decided to add some lighter highlights of uniform grey. I'm doing jaggedy highlights here, a term I like to use for highlighting with more of a series of small taps rather than a straight solid line. It looks jaggedy and it tends to make things look a little bit more worn or weathered or beaten. Again, it depends on the texture. If you do this on metal, it looks a bit beaten. If you do it on cloth, it looks a little bit torn or threadbare. So it's kind of up to you what kind of effect you want, but it's a really quick, easy way of getting a nice highlight, but also making the model look weathered. And if you've got the shakes, it works as a nice technique for your models. So you know, if you're worried about solid thin lines, just do some jaggedy highlights. Again, here I'm just adding some extra thin matte black down for a little bit extra definition, much like I did with the My Name Is Ill character with the cream jumper earlier on. Now here I'm going to add some poppy red to things like the eyelids, cheeks, maybe around the nose. This is to add a little bit of warmth to the skin, especially if they've got real pale skin. I do this a lot for like female characters, around like cheeks, around lips and stuff, just to add that more of a feminine kind of look to it. But it's really good if you want your baddies to look a little bit more evil. And these guys probably will end up being evil baddies, maybe some baddie agents and stuff like that. So putting it around the eyes makes their eyes feel a little bit more sunken, a bit like how you see Sith and Empire-esque characters, or just any kind of baddie. They always have like a bit of a redness around the eyes, so it's really good for that. You can stick on knuckles as well, and it looks like they've just been punching someone, so they're quite violent characters. It's entirely up to you. You don't have to do this stage, but I kind of like to add it. Again, it's just a really small technique for a little bit of extra punch and love. Now finally, what I'm going to do is add some dust or dirt to the boots and trousers here. I'm going to use some mid-battle dress. Initially, I'm going to dry brush this on, but after that, I'm just going to add a little bit of water to my brush, and I can just mix that in. And what it will do is it will kind of weather up the legs, so you get that kind of chalky, dry texture from the dry brush, but adding that kind of moisture in there will help give it a bit of a glaze as well. So in some of those recesses, or where it looks a bit too chalky, it will kind of merge in, a bit like the blending situation I did earlier, and it just helps it look more like dried up, caked up dirt. And if you want to, you can add this as well, like just thin some battle dress down and go around like the jacket and the sleeves. I do this a few times on a lot of my models if I feel like something like greys or some colours that look a little bit lackluster, adding a little bit of a yellowy, warm kind of sandy colour in there. One looks a bit weathered, and also just adds a nuance, that's the word I'm looking for, a nuance of tone and hue. And there we are, our male civilian survivors are done. As I mentioned, this was only using a simple palette of colours. Feel free to add in or take away your own colour choices. It's entirely up to you. This is just a suggestion. Now, I often find doing bunches of 3 miniatures in the same scheme, then use a different set of colours for the next 3 and so on, really helps make an assorted bunch of characters. It just means in one sitting you can do 3 of the same colours, mix it around a bit, and then another night do a different bunch of colours, and so on and so forth. Especially when you all mix them all together at the end, it does look a lot more ad hoc. Much like these Tall Civilians here, I did several groups, some red and black, some green, some grey, and then when I bunched them all together, it just looked like a big ad hoc group of rabble, which is great when you're doing 15 or 20 of them. But regardless, I hope you found this video useful, and stay tuned for more. Peachy out.